This Friday, your favorite emotions are back on the big screen in Disney and Pixar's Inside Out 2.
It's time to greet your Team Riley! It's anger!
Let me at him!
Fear!
Safety checklist is complete!
Disgust! Ew, ew! Sadness is in the house! Oh, no.
Hello, I'm anxiety. I'm one of Riley's new emotions.
Disney and Pixar's Inside Out 2.
There's a part 2? We're going!
Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested. Only in theaters Friday. Get tickets now.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Whether you're selling a little or a lot, Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. From the launch your online shop stage, all the way to the we just hit 1 million orders stage. No matter what stage you're in, Shopify's there to help you grow. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/special offer, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/special offer.
They say that time is money. Unfortunately, they stopped accepting my watch as payment when I tried to order a coffee. But when it comes to this film, a coffee won't cost you an arm and a leg, it will cost you an hour and a minute. Luckily, we've got all the time for this flick, because 2011's In Time is not that bad. Welcome one and all to It's Not That Bad, the podcast that looks for A grades in B movies and a proud member of the Pantheon Podcast Network. Whenever there's a movie out there that I take a shining to, and I discover that all of a sudden the critics had their way with it, I'm not saying I get angry, I'm not saying I get vengeful, but I got a podcast in an hour at a time, so I'm going to state my case, because this time we're talking about the movie In Time. And here to join me right on time is none other than Carson Elcombe. Carson, welcome back to the show. How are you doing, man?
I'm doing wonderful. I was early. I wasn't even on time. That's how stoked I was for this one.
That's right. You were ahead of time. So
there we go.
I'm going to get all the bad jokes out early as much as I can. So, Carson, when we were preparing for you to come onto the show, and I literally, there was no question whatsoever. I threw this movie at you. Had you ever seen it before?
So, no, I didn't see it up until you brought it up. However, I knew of it, and I have seen kind of scenes and snippets here and there. It was an interesting watch for me. It was actually a really unique movie that I wasn't entirely expecting it to turn out the way it did, but it was an interesting watch is how I'll start it off.
Yeah, it was funny. It was one of those really interesting conversations where I'm like, Carson, I need an episode. You're watching In Time. And it's like, okay, I'm going to watch In Time.
I'll do anything for you, Jason. Anything.
I mean, you're lucky I have good taste in movies. At least
yeah.
At least I didn't sit there and say, like, you have to watch like Ernest Goes to Camp.
Oh gosh. There's so many Ernest movies I want to forget, and that is one of them. Jeez.
How about all of them? Really? Let's be honest.
Oh, come on. Ernest Christmas? That's like a classic.
There's going to come a time when we're going to have to go down that Ernest road, and I am dreading that day.
It's like a 20% hit rate of movies. There's like 80 million of them.
Yeah. If I ever really want to torture myself, I could just basically do like at least 2 months of Ernest films, and I don't know if I'd be the same person afterwards.
No, I feel like there'd be a bit of a hike in your therapy bills for those couple months.
Yeah. And I think the only therapy for that is to go back and then watch In Time again, because this is a phenomenal film. I'm going to be ridiculously biased because A, I'm a sci-fi geek. B, I like a really cool concept when it comes to my sci-fi. So dear listeners, if you are expecting me to sit there and moan and groan and complain about this film, you are here for the wrong show, because this film, personal opinion, damn good. But before we get into why I think that, it is time to take In Time and trailerize it.
In the future, time is the currency of the world. Age is not finite, and everything still costs way too much. Once you hit 25, you stop aging and the clock starts ticking. Which means nothing about Los Angeles has changed either. Justin Timberlake is Will Salas, a down-on-his-luck denizen of the slums, living day by day and hour by hour, until he saves some rando in a bar who happens to have centuries of time on his account. But when that rando gives all his time to Will, he bails on his neighborhood, finds some hot heiress and lives it up crazy style. Which means nothing about Los Angeles has changed at all. Together with that heiress, these time bandits will Bonnie and Clyde their way through the banks, then Robin Hood their stealings, giving new meaning to the term timeshare. Justin Timberlake stars in Time, rated PG-13 for particularly grim.
Honestly, I need a compilation of just you trailerizing things because there's some of the best parts of each episode. Like right off the bat, love it.
Right? Honestly, they should never hire me to do real trailers. If ever someone hired me to do a real trailer for a movie, no one would go and watch it. They would.
You're selling yourself short.
Or everyone would go to watch it because they'd be sitting there going, what the hell is up with this film? Like for reals.
They'd be sitting there being like, it's not that bad guy. Oh my God.
Right? All right, let's get into who is in this film. This movie stars Justin Timberlake, Amanda Seyfried, Cillian Murphy, Olivia Wilde, Alex Pettyfer, Johnny Galecki, Matt Bomer, and Vincent Kartheiser. It was written and directed by Andrew Niccol. Now, listen to the list of films that he has written and directed. Gattaca, Lord of War, and he also wrote The Truman Show. So when it comes to high concept science fiction, at least, movies, Andrew Niccol has got it going on. Because let's be honest, The Truman Show, that is peak cinema.
That is one of my favorite movies to date. Like, it's exquisite to me. Absolutely love The Truman Show. And I didn't even know that was something he did.
Yep. Just wrote it, didn't direct it, but still, that is a phenomenal story. And the funny thing, too, is that, yes, it does parallel other movies. Like, of course, there was Ed TV that came out as well. But that in itself is actually an adaptation. If I remember, if I get the number wrong, please don't at me. Louis XVI, which is a French version of basically what Ed TV was. So, I mean, there was some, a initial storyline to kind of pull from. But what he did with The Truman Show, phenomenal. There was an award for this film, and it's actually one of the good ones. At the 2012 Teen Choice Awards, Justin Timberlake was nominated for Choice Movie Actor in a Drama. He lost to Zac Efron for The Lucky One. And I feel kind of bad because I know for a fact this is at least the second time we have had to talk about Justin Timberlake on this show, because we covered The Love Guru way back when, and I'm still recovering from that one.
I have never seen The Love Guru, mostly because that's a lie. I've seen a quarter of it and I couldn't get through it. So I turned it off. That's actually one of the very few movies that I have straight up just shut off and walked away, which is rare for me considering how much I watch for this show.
But the thing is, I will give Justin Timberlake full credit where credit is due. He may have been the best part of The Love Guru. And I have to remind myself that this episode was like, I think we actually covered this over 100 episodes ago. That's how long ago The Love Guru was covered on this podcast. Over 100 episodes. Holy crap, we've been here way too long. But if I remember correctly, Justin Timberlake was in fact my MVP from The Love Guru. So that's saying a lot. Although I know we're going to have to talk about Timberlake one more time, because somewhere down the road, there's going to have to come a time when we cover Southland Tales, and I'm sort of pseudo dreading that one, but even though I have the DVD.
Are you a big Justin Timberlake guy, like just in terms of acting?
You know what's funny? Let me give you my thoughts on Justin Timberlake. Dear listeners, if you listen to the There Can Only Be One podcast, you know already that I'm a metalhead. So Justin Timberlake's music, I could give or take. The songs, when they're on the radio, yeah, they're catchy like syphilis. I get it. But I gained an absolute entire solar system of respect for Justin Timberlake at SARS Fest. Now, I didn't go see him at SARS Fest, but anyone who remembers SARS Fest, and by the way, SARS, hey, remember like pandemic-y type things? There was this big concert where all these bands played in order to kind of raise money for, basically SARS research and SARS relief and whatnot. And Justin Timberlake was one of the artists. But keep in mind, also on the bill, on the same stage, was freaking AC/DC. So Timberlake gets up there and he's getting booed and water bottles are being thrown at him. He still does his show. And then they ask him about it in like the post, like his post-show presser. And he's like, you know what? If I was here to see AC/DC, I'd throw things at me too. And I'm just like, he gets it. There's a level of humility there. And I'm just like, I can't hate you. No matter how much I may like or dislike your music, that is a perfect response. So bravo, Justin Timberlake. You handled one of the worst situations the best. It's awesome.
I was going to say, self-awareness from celebrities is always something that, like, I'll say makes them more likable because you don't see it often, but that's like a pinpoint example of a solid dude.
Yeah. And also, to your music fans, don't throw shit at the performers.
I was going to say, yeah, PSA, don't, regardless, even if they're awful, like that, no one needs that. No one deserves that.
No musician is bad enough for you to throw things at them on stage. It's not cool. It's not cool.
Hey, it's Kaylee Cuoco for Priceline. Ready to go to your happy place for a happy price? Well, why didn't you say so? Just download the Priceline app right now and save up to 60% on hotels. So whether it's Cousin Kevin's Kazoo Concert in Kansas City, go Kevin, or Becky's Bachelorette Bash in Bermuda, you never have to miss a trip ever again. So download the Priceline app today. Your savings are waiting.
Go to your happy place for a happy price. Go to your happy price, Priceline.
This film actually made some bank. It only had a budget of $40 million. Domestically, it only made $37 million. Worldwide, $173 million, which is cool because I have said before, sci-fi is one of those genres that is really hard to sell at the box office. It's almost like a niche audience. And I don't remember this film having like that big a marketing campaign. So it got enough people in there. I'm sure Timberlake's name on the bill probably got quite a few people in there because when it released on the October 28th, 2011 weekend, it debuted at number 3 with $12 million. The number one film that week debuting was Puss in Boots with $34 million. Number 2 was Paranormal Activity 3. The other big debuting film that weekend was The Rum Diary. It debuted with $5 million at number 5. So $12 million for at $40 million, I would say low budget sci-fi film releasing on Halloween weekend. That's ballsy. And it did well, and kudos to them. It says a lot about at least the marketing campaign that was out there, that many people went to go see it.
I was going to say, that's not something I inherently remember because I would have been, how old am I? I would have been 10 at the time this movie released. So I was probably one of the people seeing Puss in Boots. That's where I was at that weekend. But this movie, I think we're going to have a good conversation because I have some definitely differing opinions from the hype you're giving this, but I love the hype you're giving it. I mean, all power to you. But yeah, there were some things that did not bode well for me during this viewing.
Oh, I mean, is it perfect? No. But if we talk about the mission statement of our podcast here, our main goal is to prove that this film is better than the score that the critics gave it. At Metacritic, this film has a Metascore of 53 and a Rotten Tomatoes. The audience score is 51%, the Tomatometer 37. I have seen many films with a much higher score than a 37% critic score that are not as good as this.
No, and I can get behind you 10,000% on that. I don't think this deserved that low. Like, that's pretty egregious considering what this movie's substance is and kind of what it tries to tell you. But there's also, I definitely sit more in the audience scale of things around that 51, maybe like 55% mark.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, like I said, it's not perfect. I would even give it as high as a 65 to 70%, more based on the concept alone. But let's get to the breakdown. Justin Timberlake as Will Salas. How was he for you?
So there were moments where Justin Timberlake had me. He had me reeled in. He was selling me what I was trying to buy based on this movie, but there was just moments where I couldn't take him seriously. And I think that was the toughest part for me. And as we get into it, there's a few select scenes, and this is going to sound awful. I know acting's hard. It's a hard gig. He's also done so much in his career, but there's some emotional moments that I laughed because I just could not take it seriously in the moment for how he was reacting. And I feel like when you have kind of the face of your movie in any respect, at least give me those moments, I'm instantly a little more tuned out than I was to start it. So did he have some pretty intense moments that I thought were really well done? Absolutely. But for every 5 of those, I felt there was maybe 7, 8, 9 tough moments for me to watch.
I mean, let's take a look at the character of Will. He's a bit of a complex character, right? He's not exactly a good guy, but he's not necessarily a bad guy either. Like, he's that middle of the road victim of circumstance. He is the product of his environment, and he's working hour by hour and minute by minute. And let me give you a little basis of this film here, dear listeners, if you have not seen this film already. And by the way, this film is 13 years old, and we're going to spoil the crap out of it. So if you really want to watch it for yourself, watch it first, then come back and listen to us. But in this film, the entire concept of currency is time. So when you turn 25, your quote unquote clock starts, and everyone has the amount of time they have remaining to live on their arm. And you don't age after you turn 25. You stay exactly the same. So when you work and you check out for the day and you get your quote unquote pay, you're paid in hours and days and weeks, and probably if you're a CEO, years and decades. So the entire idea of working for a living really does kind of sit with this. You're not just working for a living, you're working to live. And obviously when you're in, for lack of a better term, the ghetto, you're not exactly making the big hours and the big days. So you're literally at the mercy of whatever your asshole boss wants to give you. And you've got people who are trying to borrow time. There's a mission in this little, sketch area of town where they're handing out time like they would at a food bank. So obviously they're showing the class distinction, and Will is part of the downtrodden class in this. And then of course he saves the guy from the bar. The guy actually has like all this stolen time. He's got, centuries of time. And after saving the guy, he gives all that time to Will. He leaves himself like 5 minutes, enough time to be able to go to the bridge and then jump off. So now all of a sudden, Will's got centuries and, like years and years and years and years and years of time to live. What do you do? It's the same question as if I gave you $100 million, what is the first thing you would do? Actually, Carson, I'm going to ask you, what is the first thing you would do if I gave you $100 million? By the way, not going to happen. I don't have that cash. But if
I knew I came here for the right reason. I'm making bank.
Right? But what would you do? What's the very first thing you would do if someone gave you $100 million?
I go back to something my grandfather told me way back when I was probably about 11, 12, which is funny, around the time this movie came out. And we were standing in southern Alberta during one of my sister's horse riding events. And he looked up and he said that this is one thing you're never going to regret buying. This is one thing that's always going to become less and less of, and that's land. So I think for me, if I got $100 million, I'm buying a nice few acres of land somewhere, and definitely finding somewhere to root down. I know not maybe the most exciting answer, but I think that's definitely what I do, especially with the housing market nowadays. You kidding me? I'm going to buy myself somewhere to live. But if I was doing kind of free flowing and just going with the punches, I think first thing I'm doing, I'm buying season tickets to the Calgary Flames, favorite sports team. Give them more of my money while they're losing, so that's a brilliant decision. Otherwise, I am buying my dream car. That's probably the route I'm going. Maybe invest some of it, dish it out to the family, be a little generous.
I was about to say, spending money on a sports team that is in the middle of losing, that's not money well spent. That's money well spent.
That's literally, yeah.
It's all in the emphasis on the different syllables. But the other thing, too, is that Will got all this time, and now he's kind of on the run. So I think his idea of going to these different quote-unquote time zones, or basically better neighborhoods, and buying his way into, the good areas of town, that makes sense. The only thing I don't get about him is that there's a lot of mention about his father. And
I'm so glad you're getting to this. Thank you.
And we've never meet him. We don't see any flashbacks. All we have, as far as knowledge about his father, is whatever the timekeeper says about him. And it's not enough. We know his mother. We feel for his mom, but we never meet the father. And if the personality of the father is going to be the driving point of the personality of Will, we need that aspect of his character.
Yeah, like on my notes, I write bad daddy lore in caps, because that's one of the biggest things for me too, was why do I care about his dad? Why do I everything that happens with his dad is just someone else mentioning him? I don't even think we actually hear Will just fully talk about his father through this movie. It's just very much like, don't talk about him that way. And I'm like, I don't know the guy. I don't know if I care. And that was one of the big things, especially near the end of the movie, that I was at a loss for. I'm like, oh, so we're really not going to pay this off. Okay.
Yeah. I think if you're looking for an example of how to do it right, you have to take a look back at the first season of Daredevil on Netflix. And how they would constantly flash back to Matt Murdock as a kid after losing his sight, and the way his father is, and how that kind of molded at a young age the man that Matt Murdock would come to be. We needed that point of reference for Will, because otherwise all this talk about you're just like your dad, like, what dad? We haven't met the dad yet.
Could be a great dude. Couldn't tell you because I know nothing about him besides he lost a makeshift arm wrestling match years ago.
Like, what is he, like Stallone and Over the Top? Like, is this the connection we're missing here?
There's something that I apparently didn't grasp, or we didn't grasp, or it's just poor storytelling, which I'm going to lean to the latter of.
I mean, despite that missing point of reference as far as Will's character goes, Timberlake does a very, very good job with this. Like, this is one of those films that proves that he is a good actor, much better than in The Love Guru. But again, flush the character out.
Yeah, that was at least one of my biggest things, was I just feel like I don't know enough about Will to care about every scene. And I think that's what it was troubling for me throughout the movie. And I kept grasping for, because you have such an intriguing premise. You have such a good kind of universe to build around, but you give me a main character who just is very two-dimensional. And that's what kind of pulls me out of some of it. Because in this style of movie and what the premise is, like, you should really care about these people. And I felt I cared more about the extras who were at the time mission, or the bank, I'll say, for like the food bank equivalent of time. Like, I feel like I cared more about them than Will at some points.
Yeah.
And that was troubling for me.
Yeah. I mean, we didn't even get any kind of mention of the father from his mother, as played by Olivia Wilde. Like, and again, if you're sitting there going, wait, Olivia Wilde is Justin Timberlake's mom. Remember, people don't age after the age of 25, so it's okay. It can work. But how was she for you?
How much would you say she's in it for? Like maybe half the first act?
I'd say about a good 15 to 20 minutes.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was projecting too. I enjoyed her when she was on screen. Her death was brutal, man. Like,
oh yeah,
it's like the bus driver is a complete asshole. How do you not let someone on with that? Like, you see her arm and you're just like, nah, she can be one of the dead ones, and then move on. Like, man, you're a bus driver. There's no way you're getting paid bank. Like, is there no sympathy in this universe? And I get they're trying to portray that, like, hey, everyone's out here for themselves, but I'm like, that bus driver.
but that's the thing. The bus driver actually helps symbolize the neighborhood and the class distinction that they're really playing on. Like, yes, everyone in this neighborhood, in this quote unquote time zone, is out for themselves, and the price can rise or fall dependent on the whim of the person asking for the money, and it's not like they made it lecherous or anything. It's not like, you want to get on my bus, you got to give me a couple of extra hours. No, it just made like, no, the price went up, right? And it can go up and can go down. There's no rhyme or reason to it. It's like trying to get gas at the gas station these days. It was 5 cents cheaper yesterday. Oh yeah, but Wednesday. What? No, that makes no sense,
Well, and it's interesting too, because near the start of the movie, we're introduced to his like working job and him in the factory, and then he goes to get paid, and he gets paid, and he's like, well, what the hell? I did more than this. Like, I was above quota. And he was just like, yeah, but we got our new quota, so you're making less. And I do like the connection that, hey, if he maybe got a little bit more money from that, maybe Olivia Wilde lives. Like, right? Like, there is those kind of interesting connections, but that was probably one of the realest scenes for me, is when he's just like, well, didn't meet this week's quota because it went up and you didn't even know, and enjoy what little time you had compared to even last night. And that's an interesting segue.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong too, but didn't his mom give him an extra half an hour in the morning for him to be able to get
lunch.
Himself exactly. Yeah. So that half hour literally would have saved her life.
That lunch better have been good.
It probably wasn't.
I was going to say it was probably
right. But that's the thing. This death really hammers home the minute to minute and second to second live or die life in this time zone, and just the starkness of her death. Just like, there's no quiet moment. There's no hold you in your arms kind of thing. And don't go, please don't go. I wish we had, no, time's up, clock out, you dead.
I was also curious too, is there a system where almost like a defibrillator? So like if a rich person had this happen to them for some reason, do you think another way to like resurrect them? Because I was like, is there a way to have like enough hours to like jumpstart them or something? I feel like that was something I was kind of like looking for. There were just a few like small details where I was like, I wanted more elaboration. One of them being, and my girlfriend watched this with me, and she just kept referring to the movie as future Robin Hood, because that's pretty much what it comes to at the end.
Oh yeah.
As we get into that, but she kept mentioning this too: is why are none of the rich people wearing like fancy armbands or like protective stuff? You tell me they got all this money and technology, and no one's figured out like a crypto wallet for their wrist where you can't like tap it and get into it as they're like stealing from people. Because we only see something similar to that once, and it's Amanda Seyfried, I feel like near the mid part of the movie, where she's in like the dress at the, I'll say the event, the party that Will goes to, and she has it on. But like that's the only time I ever see any form of like, what is bank protection? That's like me walking around with my debit card out and my password written on my arm.
That feels like some kind of like bank or crypto security commercial. If you don't hire us, you're basically doing this, like I can get that.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it's not even like a Walkman, right? And dear listeners of a certain age, please let me explain what happens when your Walkman batteries start to die. Is that the song gets slower and you need to change the battery. And then the song's done, right? You don't even get that wind down. It is literally tick, tick, dead. That's it.
Yeah, and I've always wanted to know throughout watching it, like, I just want more in the universe. Like, how did this system come to be a thing? Who kind of built this? What was the reason for it? Why? How does it work, like, genetically? There's just a lot of in-betweens where I'm like, if this movie had an extra, like, 20, 25 minutes, because I'm pretty sure it was $1.49 was the total runtime, where I'm like, if you just gave it 10, 20 more minutes just to fill some of those gaps, I would feel a lot more come full circle and fulfilled about the moments, given that everything that happens is reliant on this premise that we have literally no idea why it exists.
I'm going to argue that fact, actually.
All right.
And first things first, though, with my argument, I'm going to ask, have you seen Civil War?
Like the new Civil War?
The brand new Civil War, yeah.
It's on my list. I've been wanting to go see it for like weekends now and haven't had the time.
Okay. I'm going to let you know that you get really no backstory to this film. You are dropped right into the middle of the Civil War. So there's no explanation whatsoever. You don't really know who the factions are. I mean, you kind of know enough. You know, California and Texas have banded together. You still have the
weirdest
quote,
rivalry in
United
history,
States.
our team in history.
Right. But the thing is, you're dropped right into the middle of it. And I think that lack of exposition allows you to be able to kind of fill the backstory yourself as things go. With this, the concept itself of money is time and class distinction, the more time you have, the more life you have. And that's not talking about length of life. I'm literally talking about the benefits of life. That all makes sense. It is a class distinction, the haves and have-nots. That's basically what the story is, at least the backstory of it. I don't think you needed to really get into why time became the currency and into why or how society broke down to this point. Just dropping you in, you don't really need too much to figure out what's going on, at least as far as the world you're living in. So I think by skipping that exposition, you can get more straight into the meat of it, which is probably a good thing.
No, I can respect that. And then hearing you say it, yeah, like I can get behind it to an extent. But for me, it's like the movie then takes that premise and does more of a, well, watch and don't tell and kind of make that for yourself. But then at nearly every avenue feeds you on the nose that, hey, this is a kind of like a philosophy for capitalism. Remember the capitalism? Hey, there's capitalism. And like, that's kind of my issue. Is there's moments for sure that I'm completely content not knowing and it adds to the environment. And then there's points where I'm like, if you're going to feed us other stuff this on the nose, and like give me at least like a paragraph of exposition on why we're here.
I mean, there's two films that I think did that short amount of exposition, or at least a ton of exposition in a short amount of time. The first one being Black Widow. And that basically did your entire exposition dump in your opening credits. And that's all you really needed. The other one is Valerian and the city or the world of 1,000 planets. And they literally did it in a montage over David Bowie's Space Oddity. And it was all you needed. That's it. I think if you could squeeze a short 2-minute kind of, you know what other movie actually did it really well? Surrogates. And we've covered Surrogates on this show. Bruce Willis, Ving Rhames, phenomenal film available on Disney Plus. Go watch it. You're going to treat yourself to it. That movie, again, took the opening credits and turned it into an exposition dump. This film, yes, could have done that, but I'm fine without it. Amanda Seyfried, who played Sylvia Weiss, loved her in this, but I want to hear your thoughts.
So I know her from a ton of other things, like Mamma Mia obviously is the big one that comes to mind, and I just recently, because I watched Ted 2, she's in that, and it's for some reason I can't take her seriously with that haircut. That is completely not to do with the movie. That's just my own bias of what I've seen her in recently. It just didn't like, I just couldn't take her seriously. But in terms of her acting, I had no issues with it. She was engaging to watch. There was storyline behind her. The biggest thing for me was the why. Like, I'm like, what about Justin Timberlake is so appealing that even when you are at a point before you're a wanted criminal, that you're like, kind of, what's a good example of this is just kind of joining in on the mayhem for no reason. Like, I get that she's been like behind daddy's money her whole life and kind of wants to escape that, but there's just so many times where I'm like, if I was a rational human being, like, would I be here? And I get that's not what we're going for. But there's just, it goes back to my suspension of belief, where there's just moments where it sells me so brilliantly. And then there's moments where I'm like, you got to give me something here to get me to kind of hop on board with you.
Yeah, I mean, I will give you that, right? I get the whole idea of he's the guy from the wrong side of the tracks. And we know he's the guy from the wrong side of the tracks. But that's still an allure to her. And then, of course, she kind of gets not necessarily kidnapped, but basically it's a hostage situation. But this is where it goes full Patty Hearst. Not necessarily Bonnie and Clyde, but this is definitely Stockholm Syndrome for sure. But I do wish there were moments here where you really could have hammered home why she went Patty Hearst, right?
Thank you. Yeah.
In that when Will brings her back to his old neighborhood and she sees the disparity from where she comes from to how Will lives. And if she sees like the people dying in this, like literally, if she witnessed someone clocking out, because I guarantee you, no one in her home district is clocking out in the middle of the street. Not happening. If she watched people clock out in the middle of the street, if she saw the sadness and the desperation of people lining up at the mission, and we could see that effect on her. Like, we get the idea that they're running from the timekeeper. We get the idea that they're running from the law. And we get the idea that she's turned against her own family, who happens to run the biggest bank in California. I get all of that. You got to give me a reason for the Stockholm Syndrome to kick in, a reason for her to change and turn against her family. Because you're right, as good as she is in it, and she handles both sides of that very well. She fits perfectly in the elite level, and then she also fits perfectly in the Bonnie and Clyde, Robin Hood, Patty Hearst kind of role. Just get me from point A to point B with a little bit more reasoning.
You're so on the money. And it goes back to what you said, where it's like, if we saw her in the slums in those moments, like you kind of see her change, but we don't see her in that setting until the final act, when she's already like, nah, I'm in. Yeah, I'm sold. Let's do it. So it's like, if you just took that and kind of put it sooner in the movie, gone back to his time zone to where he's at, I feel like you have a better established motive behind what she's doing. Instead, she's kind of like, haha, guy and car and money and adventure. And then here we are.
Yeah. Vincent Kartheiser, who played Philip Weiss, so Sylvia's dad. Your thoughts?
I struggled kind of watching him at times. And it's nothing really, I don't know if it's an acting thing. I don't know if it's a script thing. But there are just points I can't get over. I'm like, you're supposed to be, I think, an 85-year-old or something, I think he said, in a 25-year-old's body. And I get that he's trying to do those, like, I'll say like the elderly person mannerisms, and you kind of see them come out into how he speaks and whatnot. And that's when I watch and I'm just kind of like, what side can I lean on? Am I sold on this, or is this just a little too awkward to where I'm not believing what the stage of he's at in his life? I'd almost rather everyone take like, if you're going to be youthful for your whole life, then I feel like just be youthful. This whole kind of back and forth on like age, like when you look at Olivia Wilde, like there wasn't a point until I found out he was his mom or she was his mom, that I was like, oh wait, you're meant to be in your 50s, which I feel like is kind of how you should play it, is just not that you can't allude to it, but just kind of pick a fact that you're in a 25-year-old's body, and you don't have to like half and half it between that and an 85-year-old, I'll say. But other than that, to me, he was just kind of a plot device, which is fair for what he did. But I was just lacking something from kind of a head antagonist, as you would view it. He's just kind of there.
Yeah. I mean, the problem by painting yourself into this, basically you're scripting yourself into a hole, right? If no one ages after the age of 25, then you're stuck with people, or at least with actors of a certain age. And with that, you lose a little bit of the, for lack of a better term, gravitas that comes with age. Like, normally this is the kind of role that would go to like a Brian Cox or a Tommy Lee Jones, someone of that kind of, I don't want to say elder statesman, but at least that level of upper crust gravitas. And you don't really get that. And I don't know if Vincent Kartheiser actually had that in the role. I don't hate the idea of not aging, but I want to pitch a casting change for this, if you will.
All right, let's do it.
Okay. Based on age, okay, Vincent Kartheiser currently is 45 years old, right? So this being a 13-year-old movie now, he would have been about
32-ish,
about 31, 32-ish, right? Because math is hard. Only 3 years younger, but still I think could have pulled this off. Alexander Skarsgård would have been perfect for this, and it still would have made sense as Amanda Seyfried's father.
I'm just looking, I pulled up a photo of him now just to like see if I could kind of slice him in there. And yeah, like Alex Skarsgård, all the Skarsgård's acting has been brilliant the last 2 decades. And I think he could have fit like a glove. And he also has that villainous kind of face where you're like, oh, you got money. You're kind of a top guy, but also I can see him acting of a much more mature stature. It's just, the believability in the character has to be there, and you just got to pick what you want. And to say he could have done it better, I mean, that's up in the air. It could just be a script thing, and that's what the director wanted, and that's what they went with. But there's just something more there that I want.
Yeah. I mean, I will say that, and I don't mean to slag him in any sense, right? I don't like to do that. But Philip Weiss came off as someone that should get robbed, basically.
No, 100%. It gives me the vibes of like if a crypto bro in today's day and age tried to be pretend to be a rich old man.
He is a straight crypto bro in this. But the other thing too, I will say is that there is a point where we realize that even though he's the head of the bank in California, we understand, because Sylvia says so, that there are bigger banks and that Philip and the Weiss family are subservient to those bigger banks. So there's this mysterious like overlord power that's even bigger than Weiss, and they're ruling over the area. There's bigger fish to fry. And I think in that case, Vincent Kartheiser plays it very well because he does subservient to a higher power, not higher power, but a greater time management, time organization, time running overlord.
So whenever I go back to the final scene in particular, with just the one little, what are they called? Are they called like, I'm going to call them cards, chips? Like what are the time machine pieces called? Do we know?
I'm not quite sure because everything's kind of embedded into their arms, right?
I know. It's that whatever they use to like scan and like give money and whatnot. When that little last chip is in his vaults, and there's like 10 million or something.
Oh yeah,
hours or whatever on it.
Like almost like the portable time kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, that thing. So it's even when I think about stuff like that, and I think of his one character and he's like guarding that. It's his first million or whatever he says. I can't even remember. But I think once you bring in the idea that there's another higher power, I'm instantly like, so are they watching this and being like, they can handle it? Are they not even fazed by the fact that they're robbing that much time? Are they kind of keeping an eye out? Like for me, it just gave the vibes of, hey, if this does well, we can make a sequel out of it. And that's something that I'm just missing, where I'm like, if you're going to kind of tease them to be that, I feel like maybe give me a little something of the fact that they're there. Maybe even just, I don't know if it needs to be exposition or just a part where he's like, no, this lower level guy still has control of it. He can deal with it. Yeah.
Cillian Murphy as timekeeper Raymond Leon. Your thoughts?
This is going to sound awful. Through the first like time we saw him, I didn't know if he was part of like his own gang or if he was law enforcement at first, because they don't actually say that the timekeepers are quote unquote like a law enforcement style until later in the movie, like 30-45 minutes in-ish. So I'm sitting there being like, who are you at first? Not in the sense of who are you as a character, but like, who are you with? Are you like a leader of people? Because then we have that small gang at the start that I'm also like, who are you people and why do I care? But Cillian Murphy, I enjoyed his acting. Like he really portrayed it well. I thought he sold it well. But it struggled to kind of, for me to follow at some points, because they keep throwing in random characters and then not really giving them backstory. I would have loved more backstory on Cillian Murphy's character, especially when he gets shot and then Will gives him more time. And I'm sitting there and he mentions that like, no, timekeepers are also living day to day. So I'm like, I would kill to have like an idea of how Cillian Murphy lives. Like maybe a scene where he goes back to his own place and I just see him at the end of day and like what kind of his life is like, capturing these people and being hired by someone who has millions of years, hours, whatever it may be. I just want more from him being a kind of protagonist, antagonist, depending on how you look at it.
You know, it's funny you mentioned the whole living day to day kind of thing. He doesn't have to. It's a choice by him because, you know, his teammates, his coworkers, they're not constantly going for their per diem kind of thing. And I think that's a cool aspect of the timekeeper, in that in Cillian Murphy's character, he continuously puts himself in a state where he feels like he needs to be on the run. And there's this scene where, like, you know, Will and Sylvia jump out of the window. They're like, they're not going to jump. Cillian Murphy jumps. The reason why is because his clock is winding low anyway. So it's almost like this adrenaline rush that he's given himself in order to be able to keep up with the people that he's chasing. That was fascinating and added an extra layer to why Timekeeper Leon was so good. The other thing too is the realization that he also grew up in that neighborhood, which is why he knew Will's father. And again, I'm fine with the idea of like all these young actors because we've established that happens. And this is the only reason why we even hear about Will's dad. And again, we get back to that's a necessary point, but here is the linchpin that if we had that exposition moment, if we had that time after the timekeeper got shot and, you know, Will gave him that time to help him live. Obviously, he's not going to stick around and wait for him, right? But
yeah, and he even says, he's like, when they're leaving in the car, he's Amanda Seyfried is like, well, why didn't you just let him die? And he's like, well, I only gave him 2 hours. He still might. So that's a nice little kind of add on to say like, hey, I'm not a complete, you know, killer, but also like I still am kind of out for myself.
Yeah.
Nice character building.
Well, exactly, right? It shows that Will is not necessarily just a bad guy. You know, he does have morals. He does have some kind of compass within him, even though it's not exactly, you know, it kind of sits in the middle.
And you see it even at the start too, when he gets out of the house for the first time and that little girl comes up to him and he's like, sure, take 5 minutes. Like even he's selfless. And then that kind of changes through the second act where he's kind of trying to grapple with how much time he has. And then he starts to then obviously kind of Robin Hood it and find where he lives in this system, in this society, which is nice. Like I said, there's so many good aspects of his character that sell me, but I just want more. Like I just want that little sprinkles on the top to give me that fleshed out.
Yeah. You know, it's funny you mentioned Robin Hood, and as you go through the lore of Robin Hood and you see how they've kind of, you know, adapted this over time. You could argue that this is kind of a Robin Hood story. But in that sense, think of it. Philip Boyce at that point is the prince, and the timekeeper is definitely the sheriff of Nottingham. Like the parallels are definitely there, and there's definitely inspiration pulled from the Robin Hood lore. And that's not necessarily a bad thing.
No, not at all. Even when I say it as a kind of an idea or just something to think about, by no means am I ripping on the movie for that either. Like that's such a not a tried and true premise. I mean, you can argue that, but it fits really well into what they're trying to portray. I mean, you take a book that's over 100 years old now, kind of make it into a futuristic adaptation. Once again, not direct association, but theming wise, and it does its job really well.
Oh, I mean, some of the best modern movies are riffs on classic literature. I mean, how many Shakespeare adaptations, but they're not really Shakespeare adaptations, are out there?
The Lion King obviously being the best one.
Right? No.
But seriously.
I will argue that one. The best Shakespeare non-adaptation out there, and if you're not Canadian, you're not necessarily going to get this, it's Strange Brew. The Bob and Doug McKenzie film. It's Hamlet. It's Hamlet.
I've never thought about that to this point. You kind of just blew my mind.
Think about this. Let me explain. I'm just going to go on a Strange Brew diatribe here. So please pardon me while we pause our discussion of In Time so I can blow your mind. So in Hamlet, okay, the brother kills the king and then marries the wife to take over the kingdom. In Strange Brew, the brother kills the head of the brewery and then marries the widow to take over the brewery. All right? Rosie LaRose is Hamlet. The daughter of the brewery is Ophelia. Bob and Doug McKenzie are Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. And in Hamlet, it is Elsinore Castle. And in Bob and Strange Brew, it's Elsinore Brewery. It's Hamlet.
You just absolutely blew my mind. I did not expect to be going into a classic like Strange Brew on a mini tangent, but that was beautiful. I'd never even thought about it that way, but that's another great example. Like, it just, these stories still work in so many different meanings and themings and just stories that there's nothing wrong with a tried and true formula as long as you do your own thing with it.
Oh yeah, it is. There are only so many stories. What is it? There's only like 33 stories in human history, and everything else is just a variation on those riffs.
You know, when you said the Canadian, that you're only going to get this, my instant thought went to My Own Private Idaho, just for Keanu Reeves, but I'll accept Strange Brew as well, because classic movie, especially for my family. It's a great throwback movie.
Right. Also, sadly, we cannot talk about Strange Brew on the show because it's too good to qualify.
It's perfection. Exactly. I mean, it's sorry, not sorry.
Right. Now, if Hamlet had a flying beer drinking dog, maybe more people would read Shakespeare in high school.
I mean, I can't say I wouldn't not enjoy that premise. I mean, I always did well with Shakespeare in high school. I always thought it was interesting, but I get the non-supporters or the people that think it's boring. But I've always been a story person. I've always been able to take a lot from them, so I can respect both mediums, so to speak.
Put more beer in Shakespeare and English marks will go up around the world. You're welcome. Alex Pettifer, who played Fortis, the local head thug of the gang that's working, the neighborhood that Will comes from. How was he for you?
I labeled him in my notes as, oh, hey, plot exposition. Because it's mean to an extent. And I know whenever I critiqued actors or acting roles, like I would never be able to do what they could. It's not at all me judging. More is just this character simply exists for Will to find the initial guy that gives him all the money. Like, that's the only purpose he actually serves in the entire movie. And then we get to the scene where he dies, and I'm sitting there the moment they do it, and I'm like, well, Will's obviously gonna win. Like, they're not even gonna have it come close. But I do like how they pay off when they're talking about the what do they actually call it? Is it just fighting? Like,
yeah, it's fighting. So, dear listeners, if you have not seen this movie by now, and by now you don't need to see the movie, but let me explain. So they lock arms in kind of like almost like an arm wrestling thing, but rather than
forearm wrestle.
Exactly. But rather than, try to basically do like an arm wrestle move, you have to twist the hold one way or the other to see who's giving who time. This is kind of how they transfer funds between person to person. So they'll lean over to one side and then they kind of hold their arm there, and you can hear the clock kind of ticking down. And it definitely slows down as you get close to the end, and you can hear the time ticking tonality change. And then you basically flip the other way to start the time going the other side. And this whole thing about Will not ever looking at his own arm, so he's not focused on how much time he does have. He just uses the time that he has while everyone else looks at their arm. It shows that, time is not necessarily of the essence for him, which allows him to be able to survive as long as he has. That being said, that's a dumbass game. That is a TikTok trend waiting to happen at that point.
That's like the Tide Pod challenge. If you put that nowadays, it's just every kid is just wasting their time, literally and figuratively.
Definitely.
But that scene, my biggest thing with that was, I'm like, oh, so it's a character that served only as a plot device going up against the main character. And I'm like, you're going to die. Like, that's not even a bad thing that he does. But for me, what actually really surprised me in that scene is they pay it off first off, which is nice to see, because they talk about earlier in the movie how when these fights and arm wrestles happen, that you wait till the very last few seconds so they think they've won, and then you use all the energy that you saved and you tip it over on them, and then you take it. Really cool payoff. Enjoyed that. I was inherently surprised that he killed 3 bystanders when he did it. Yeah. And I think that's trying to symbolize his kind of transformation, so to speak, into more of this outlaw bank robber. But it didn't fit his character, so to speak. Like, I didn't think he was just going to shoot both of them. Yeah. Like, I get that he's taken time from people, and that's a premise. And, you can argue on what the kind of repercussions of that death are compared to shooting someone. But it just surprised me that they actually went that route and said, no. Just because he's doing something good and trying to do something good for other people doesn't mean he's not also a problem or a killer. So I thought that was a cool premise, actually.
Yeah, I mean, there's the thing, and I'm glad you pointed that out. At no point has Will proven that he is future John Wick. So for him to be able to basically kill everyone off while still holding the dead guy's arm, we don't have that level of skill established.
No, and just while we're on the topic of the gun side of things, not to take this on another kind of tangent, but one thing that really bothers me in these kind of this era of movies too, like I think you can honestly look up to some points to today, but definitely 15 on back, is the whole trope of it's the woman and the man's a killer. So by that logic, not only does the woman not know how to use a gun, but she's actually just incredibly dumb and is just trigger happy. And they use that twice with Amanda Seyfried, and it just infuriates me. Mini side thing, just not necessary. But going back to the John Wicking of the plot devices, brilliant. Loved it. Would have liked a little bit more of like a transition into it, but I still thought it was an interesting take on kind of his complete turnaround into who he is now.
One last person to talk about here, Johnny Galecki, who played Will's friend Boral. First of all, it's Johnny Galecki in a film, so that's cool. But how was he for you?
Along with my so positive notes to this point, I put Johnny Galecki died exactly how I thought he would.
Yeah.
And that's not only like he drinks himself to death is what's said. And the moment he was given all that money and we see that he's kind of like a partier, a bit of a drunk at the start, I was like, oh buddy's going to die. But I tell you, the scene where he goes back to his place and finds his wife and kid, that tugged on the heartstrings a little.
Yeah.
Because like it was very real. You have a guy in the slums who's working day to day, is struggling mentally, obviously has an addiction issue, and then you try to do something nice and it kind of blows up. And you can even kind of connect that to just any time where at the end of the day, you can try to be nice. You can give, maybe there's someone struggling, you give them money, but there's always the possibility that they turn around and do something negative with that and it hurts someone. So still having that theme within the movie where time is the currency is still really interesting because, I mean, it tarnished his family. His family could have done so much with that money, but instead he spent that on booze, whatever it may have been, and put himself in the grave. So that was a really emotional moment for me.
It was the line too where she says he still had 9 years on his clock. Like he wasted a decade that he could have used for his family, given to his wife, put into his kids' like clock account if they have that kind of thing. Because again, your clock doesn't start till you turn 25, right? So he's got a kid. He's got that 10 years wouldn't have even seen his kid hit 25. So that's 10 years that he could have maybe, not had to work as hard or at least find a way to better their situation. But no, very first thing, like soon as Will's gone, I was like, honey, going across, I'm going to get a drink, going out. And that's it. And I think it was really good too, because it shows the generosity that Will had and it still didn't do a damn thing and it made things worse.
Yeah, I definitely loved how they did it. I wish we got like a little bit more of Johnny Galecki, because when he did die, I was like, oh no. But like, anyways, like stuff moves on. So I wish we had more of just like a friend connection between the two of them, where it was like this was a little more heavier for him to digest. But nonetheless, I think it was a really cool idea that they executed on solidly.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to point out that I found fascinating. So this film is set in 2169. All right. So we're a ways away from there. And if people in 2169 are still listening to this podcast, welcome to the future, I guess, but hear me out. 2169. So set literally over, I guess, at that point, 150 years into the future. No flying cars, no super futuristic buildings, no robots, still deals in currency. So this ideal that Star Trek tried to put out, how currency doesn't exist anymore, everyone works for the greater good, possessions are not really a thing per se, like there's no haves and have-nots. Society hasn't changed a damn bit in this future. So, Carson, I'm going to ask you then, looking 150 years into the future, forget time as currency. Are we going to have a future that looks like this or a future that looks more like a Star Trek?
I think people always overshoot what the future is. And I think a great example of this is the second Back to the Future movie. I mean, 85 to 2015, and you kind of, obviously science fiction, more fictionalized, but you kind of saw what they thought maybe could happen in 30 years. Flying cars, all that kind of thing. I don't think we're going to see, like, this is more accurate to me, where we still have a very industrial sector of society, a very kind of standard to what we have now, but there's slight more technological personal changes. I mean, even when you look at a good example, a good example in today's fashion, where people are still fashionably kind of going back to the 90s era right now, late 80s, like these kind of trends tend to pick itself up again. And you see that in this movie, in the cars specifically. You never see a car newer than 1975. And all the timekeepers are rolling around in 71 Challengers. You have Will, who picks up a 1969 Jaguar E-Type, I believe it was. And then you see kind of the fancier people driving around in their Rolls that are just more modified. So I think that's honestly not as far-fetched as I think it is in the terms of, as we like to hold on to history. And I think we will see that in a physical way, maybe not as similar to this. But while I'm on the tangent of this as well, the cars like oddly pissed me off. And not because they were designed weird or kind of what they were, but because they were still internal combustion. But they also had like this weird rocket ship sounding whine to them that I'm just like, why was that necessary? And it pissed me off to a point where I focused on it so much. And it was really bad timing because it got to the scene where they are in the, what are they called? Like the sewage ducts or like the drainage ducts in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And they're driving in the Jaguar and they hit a spike strip, which how you didn't see, I don't know. It's, you have nothing else to look at. And there's a spike strip laying across the road. And then you topple down what seemed like at least 40 feet in a convertible with no seatbelts on. I checked the scene before it. Everyone's still in the car. There's literally no damage. The car is like kind of dinged up. I mean, obviously it's undrivable, but like it doesn't even look that bad. And you're both just in the car. Like that's one thing where I'm like, you lost me on this entire scene. Like I couldn't take it seriously.
Yeah, I can hear the Cinema Sins video now going, they survived this. Ding!
100%. That's perfect.
All right, Carson, before we go now, it is time. Who is your MVP of In Time?
I'm going with Cillian Murphy. And just because he intrigued me the most, maybe it's a little bit of bias with everything he's been doing lately and the fact that Hollywood's been shoving him down our throats seemingly since early 2023 with Oppenheimer coming out. I thought he had a really interesting character. I just wanted a little bit more on the story front of him. I just wanted more of who he really was. And you get down to I don't think they did him justice in his death either. Like for such a brilliant guy, like I just don't, like they kind of give him almost like not a suicide, but like they essentially give him a suicide. And that kind of disappointed me a little bit. I would have almost rathered him like pull the Fast and Furious 1 end where Brian O'Connor just like lets Vin Diesel go kind of deal. Like that seems more well arced for his character based on how he also sees things and where he came from. I feel like him just dying because he didn't pick up enough time in his front seat of his Dodge Challenger was a little sad. But beyond that, I really enjoyed him when he was on screen. I was always engaged when he was on screen, and that's what I'm looking for, especially in these kinds of movies.
He's also my MVP, but I wanted to give a bit of a shout out to Olivia Wilde. And again, I know we didn't see her that long, but
she sold it though.
That's the thing. You felt for Will when his mother died. You felt the gut punch of that scene and just the suddenness of her death. And it really showed, you know, the minute to minute life and death life that they live. That doesn't hit as hard as it does if Olivia Wilde doesn't play a very good mother in this. So I have to give her credit, but no, Cillian Murphy definitely is my MVP.
Also, if I could slip one last thing in, and this is just like my own personal piss off, is that the bus driver, for being the human being, comes out with the best karma in this movie. He essentially kills the mom, Olivia Wilde, at the start. And then they get back on the bus with the timekeeper chasing them. And he's like, would so-and-so amount of time do this for you? And he was like, done, get in. So not only did he essentially kill a person, but he also profited off their death.
Apparently, bus drivers getting paid. So it's all good.
In this universe, that's the dream, apparently.
Exactly. All right, Carson, please, before we go, let our listeners know where they can find you out there on the interwebs.
You can find me at Carson Elk12, ELC12 on X. And you can also find me at flameforthought.com and Flames Pulse, where I write about the Calgary Flames and the NHL. And as Jason and I were talking about before we started recording, there'll be a soon update to that list coming in a few short weeks here.
And when that happens, we will be sure to get you on here so everyone knows what you're up to. Carson, thank you so much for basically saying yes to this movie I completely threw at you. And I'm sorry.
Wonderful time.
I'm sorry it was a DVD, and I'm sorry about the head trauma.
You know what? I don't regret it. It was a solid movie to watch. I always enjoy doing these. And I mean, you could throw any movie at me and I'd be like, done. When can we film?
Well, I was about to say, if you can dodge a DVD, you can dodge a ball. So we're good. All right. And to you, our listeners, you guys know the drill. If there is a movie out there that you think is unfairly maligned, or there is no way in Time District 12 that we can find anything good to say about it, hit us up on social media at NotThatBadCast. And while you're there, make sure you check out our Coming Soon page so you can see all the episodes that we are preparing, so you can drop your shout outs and we will give you a shout out in the show. Until next time, he's Carson. I'm Jay. You guys are awesome. This is It's Not That Bad, a proud member of the Pantheon Podcast Network. Take care.